Camille, tell us a little bit about your work. What do you do, and what are the most difficult challenges you've experienced, and how have you addressed them?
Hello, everyone. I had the advantage of working both at the university and the children's hospital, the psychiatric ward. And what we have experienced during the pandemic time that we, as a psychiatric ward, but many other psychiatric wards for children and adolescents at the same time were overstretched, and there were more patients with serious conditions that we could handle. And what our idea was to try to find a digital way to reach to children and adolescents earlier before they really need to be clinically and treated at the hospital. So our experience was to build a program, a digital app that could do some testing and some screening beforehand, especially for those children and patients who have no access whatsoever to psychologists, psychotherapists, or psychiatrists, especially those from smaller cities or villages around Poland, because we, as Mike said, there's like some digital gap in the UK, but I think that Poland is entering the digital world, especially for healthcare in general, and mental healthcare is something totally not existent in the digital world in Poland. So what we have implemented is an application that puts some traditional assessment tests that are available usually in clinical practice for patients to fill them in at home or after a visit at the GP. And after that, to have an online consultation with a practitioner, for example, from the university hospital, to assess what are the needs of this person, if they meet any criteria for any psychiatric disorders, and then to channel them to organizations that can offer help and prevent getting more serious problems. What is our struggle was to get funding, because the Polish NHS, the NFZ, is not funding any new initiatives because they don't have the funds to do that. So we had to partner with third parties, especially for the IT part, because that side of a project is not something that a medical university can handle. So we've partnered with pharmaceutical companies and third parties to do the front end and back end development of the application. And of course, we also had to take into account the privacy of the data of our patients.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camille, for that. Again, I'll come back to you. I have a lot of questions. I mean, there's the questions around partnership in terms of how we manage that as well. So let me defer with those are here as well. So let me pick two from here again before I come back to Lucy. Okay, so let me start with Brunel. Yeah, just a little bit about what you do.
So thank you so much for having me here today. And my background is slightly different from rest of the panelists. I'm a technologist. So when I say I work on a communication side, system side, for example, the wearable like kind of a watch which you're seeing in your hands and wearing, or lots of medical devices which you use in a hospital. So the communication side, how these devices communicate to the central system and how your data goes from your local device to the cloud, the whole end-to-end system. My research is looking on that perspective, and that's where I wear two hats here on. One is making the system more resilient and robust, so that as a patient in the hospital or in a medical care, we have to trust those systems. They should be resilient. They should be robust enough that there's no if something due to comm side, if something breaks, like a device cannot connect to the remote machine, what the rest of the system will look into. So my research particularly looking on how to make these systems more robust, more resilient, more trustable. And second hat I wear is from a data perspective, because when you connect a single device from a say wearable or a medical unit to remote, these devices carry very sensitive data about the patient, and you would like to make sure this data which you transfer is always encrypted, it's always secure, it's always when you process the data at cloud side, how you make sure that data, the sensitive information is not leaked. And that's where should we, when we run a machine learning algorithm, say on a large set of data, how do we make sure that some of the sensitive data is not leaked through the machine learning models, somebody else uses the machine learning model. So one of my recent project which I'm working in this space is called MedBuff, which is a benchmarking metrics. We are designed for machine learning models which we run on medical data. So the medical data which we take into consideration are mostly images which comes from a different hospitals. And one of the problem which we are looking in this particular domain is, say one of the hospital have some certain of images, different hospital have a certain set of images, but we would like to train our machine learning model in such a way that so that it's diverse, it can take into consider multiple diversity of different type of patients from different areas, geographical areas, and ethnicities and other kind of a diversity in data. And because medical data is so sensitive, hospital cannot release the data from their local site to a cloud server. So that's where we are working with a framework called federated learning instead of a centralized learning. It means we design a machine learning models which you can transfer the part of the code on hospital sites. The models learns on a local data, and then this learned model you send back to the centralized site, and you aggregate these models together. And this cycle keep going on iterative for a long time till your models are quite precise. There are lots of, even though this model looks quite simplistic, there's a lots of problem right now we are facing in this particular project, because the IT systems, which most of the hospitals have not designed in such a way that I can give you a code and you can run that on your data. So how we make sure that hospitals are with us in this whole ecosystem, building this infrastructure underneath. So yes, there are lots of challenges here, and I would be happy to talk about them later.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think again you bring in the idea of a partnership here again, in terms of how you can partner with these institutions to ensure that the system you develop actually works for them as well. And there's a whole question again around interoperability.
Yeah.
How do we ensure that systems spread with
other systems?
Systems. Yeah, thanks so much for that. Let me move to Jerry. Yeah, just a little bit what you do. And
so yeah, actually, I'm a technologist, so I come at this space from looking at how technology can support particularly research on health and health relevant data. And I think it's really important to talk about health as well as health relevant data. We're in a world where just taking a narrow view means you leave a lot of opportunity around economic and social data, around climate data. So as you think data, think more broadly. What I'd like to, many people probably heard me talk at the first session. So one of the things that strikes me is also, as we look at technology, how does technology support skills? I listened to a program last night and a discussion on Radio 4 this morning on the way in, both of which highlighted massive skill shortages. So last night they were talking about skill shortage of nursing, frontline nursing staff. not just in the UK, but in the US. So in the US at the moment, there is a 500,000 shortage of frontline nursing staff. So just think that number in your mind. There, 500,000. That's a staggering number. It is having an impact on the medical delivery in the US. It is impacting people's health in real tangible ways. There was a great discussion on Radio 4 this morning around moving and accelerating the move to the NHS to be a fully digital world. One of the challenges there is, where are the skills going to come from? Where are the great data scientists that are going to be in there on the front line? And also, what technologies can we create that support those skills? Because we're not going to fill those gaps quickly. And therefore, we need to actually see, how can we use AI to support those skills? How can we use technology? So that's an area that I think is going to be really important. It's an area I'm really interested in. So it's about the development of those skills and about the technologies to support those developments. So that would be an interesting area. I'm also really excited listening to Mike's introduction just now. Somebody starting with not quite a blank sheet, enormous number of legacy systems, but with the opportunity to build a great data architecture around that and deliver on that, both around research, clinical delivery, and system improvement. So I'm going to be really interested to hear more from Mike as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let me move to Lucy, back to you online. Before I come to our own very own.
Hi. So I work in the world of mental health, in primary care mental health, so treatment of anxiety and depression. And in the type of services that I work in, there has always been an element of digital technology involved. There's always been an idea that we need to be offering people options that are accessible. So computerized CCBT programs have always been a part of what we offer. But I think at the moment, a lot has changed with the way that we deliver our interventions. A lot of the work now happens via video calls, via telephone calls. And there's a lot of development, like product development in the commercial market around how to better use apps to help people support their own mental health and how to integrate those into treatment, how to use AI to improve the delivery of those treatments. I think there's a lot of issues that come up for companies developing those products and making them better. So one is definitely around the management of data, concerns about privacy, concerns about what's happening with my data if this private company is collecting it in this app, and how is it connecting in to the systems that the NHS use. I think increasingly the people that use our services want to know about that stuff. They want to know how it works, what happens with their data, where it gets stored, and we get a lot of queries about that in the service. So I think all of that needs to be very clear and robust. I think the other issue that comes up, like people talked about, is the interoperability of systems, because they have to be, when developing those things, they have to be things that work well for clinicians. Clinicians are very time stretched. So if there's a system and it collects really useful data for the clinician to be aware of, but yet it's another system that they have to log into separately, or maybe they have to transfer the information from that system onto the system where the other elements of the clinical record are kept. That is very challenging for people to use in very busy jobs, and it doesn't work particularly well. So, and as you've been describing, NHS trusts will all use slightly different systems. Every service might have decided to commission a slightly different system for their service. So there's a lot of different systems being used across the country. So that partnership working between the companies developing the products, the universities developing the products, the companies that are running the record systems that are being used within the NHS, the clinicians that are going to be using the product, making sure that all of that gets connected up. That's something that we're trying to do in the world of NHS talking therapies, and we've recently set up a national consultation group so that companies or people looking to develop products can come and consult with a national level group about what is needed for them to develop a good product that will actually work and will actually get picked up within the market and used. Because what we found is that companies are getting so far with development and then coming to talk to them and it's actually, no, you need to do this, this, and this, and this. Otherwise, we are actually not going to be able to use your product. We won't be allowed to, because it has to kind of meet lots of criteria in terms of safety and clinical effectiveness. And the supporting of research in the development of those is really important, because without that evidence base that this is a product that clinically works, then it can't be picked up within the NHS, because we can't be using things that haven't been shown to be clinically effective for our patients in the world of that I work in primary care mental health.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa. I think you really raised an interesting point. Again, we'll come back to that. I mean, what is developed and what actually works, right? That is another huge, area. Then there is this whole idea that, we have so many technologies. Is there any possibility for us to match, right? To start really thinking about, Jerry mentioned about looking at the bigger picture, right? But before we go into that, let me just come back to Isabel, just a little bit again.
So sure, and I'm just going to pick up on a lot of things that have been said. In my research, and I'll talk about primarily this Consult project that you mentioned. What the purpose of Consult was to see whether it was feasible and possible to bring together data from different sensors, from the electronic health record and patient inputted information, develop and apply some explainable AI techniques to then provide recommendations to patients through chatbot and through an interface, as well as thinking also about the interface with clinicians. So that got us to basically challenge and try to figure out how we would work and solve some of the issues that have been mentioned here. Obviously, it's a research project. So we did a lot of patient engagement and stakeholder engagements, and one of the important things was that as computer scientists and data scientists, we had some really interesting ideas about how we might report the results of AI to the end users, but actually the end users looked at what we had in mind and said, actually, we'd rather have, we don't want this fancy interface, we want something simpler. So that was something that we continually revisited, so that what we end up having now, which should be going to user study as we speak, then we have something that has been co-designed with our end users and also with clinicians along the way. We encountered lots of issues about interoperability with different vendors. Sensors, great in principle, but the fact that even you as the person who wears the Fitbit, for example, actually don't have access to the full range of data, even if you want it, is an interesting point that we had to deal with. We also challenged the question of what else can we pick up along the way, and what can we do to help clinicians. So here's another system was not the right way to do it. It was like, what information do clinicians want, and how succinct can we have that information, even if it's come from a fancy AI, so that it helps them in clinical practice, rather than provide yet another interface that needs to be looked at and considered. So that's kind of my perspective from the research side. One of the other points, just to put in about this application of explainable AI within the context of apps or interfaces, or call them what you want, is also thinking about what needs to be done about the operationalization of said models, and how do we keep track of their performance? How do you keep track of how they're doing over time, and what are the guidelines in place, if any, to suddenly say, hey, this particular app that was validated is no longer doing what it needs to do. We need to go back to the drawing board, or we need to refresh the model, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisbeth. I think we've really raised very interesting discussions here so far. There are a lot of discussions around, each and every one of you talked about the idea of developing technology, the idea of having data science from multiple sources. I'm going to throw a very big question among the team here. Is there any prospect on the future for us to start merging this technology to have one system, right, rather than having multiple systems within, for example, the NHS? Is there any prospect? That also includes data merging, because Isabel also talked about the idea of merging data from multiple sources, but now said the same thing. Is there any prospect in terms of future? Mike, can I start with you on that?
Yeah, well, I would point to the fact that the NHS tried it with the National Programme for IT a couple of decades ago and failed spectacularly on it. I think that I think what we should focus on, instead of a system view of getting the data sorted out. So I think that standardization is one aspect of that, but it's also liberation of the data, because we can deal with disparate different types of data, can't we, these days, and imputation and mapping of coding, for example. But I think we are poorly prepared for the onslaught of additional personal health related data from, like, you imagine that all of this data that we're collecting as citizens and all of our devices and our shopping and our nutrition and our health and everything else is totally missed by the health service currently. So personally, I feel that we should be focusing on building the centralized data infrastructure that would be able to handle that, you know, like a NoSQL, Mongo Couch type environment, rather than trying to force it into a traditional structured relational single entity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to come back to Jerry. What do you think about this?
So I was in a really interesting debate just before the pandemic, which was hosted by NHSX and led by Matthew Gould, who was at that time leading NHSX, where we debated this. I think it's actually an undesirable goal to try and build a single infrastructure. First, the NHS is a federation of 24,000, 25,000 different organizations. So the problem of trying to say, go for a single infrastructure is it will not happen, but it will absorb everybody's efforts, huge amounts of money, huge amounts of energy by not happening, and therefore we'll set the perfect, and we'll spend lots of doing that, when actually we should be worrying about making things better and improving things. I think Mike's right. It's about data interoperability. It's about data standards. It's about technology interoperability. But actually, I think we can move much faster by a federated model where we concentrate on a smaller local entity, which is why I think the SDE strategy of NHS England around subnational secure data environments and some level of sharing at national level is the right approach. I don't think it's actually desirable. It's too big a problem to solve. So let's not try and solve a problem that doesn't need to be solved. Let's solve it at the local level. Let innovation happen at local level, and just make sure we improve the interoperability of our data, the discoverability of our data, and share what needs to be shared at national level, but a lot doesn't need to be shared at national level.
Thank you so much. That's very interesting one. But now, I mean, I think you started this discussion about federated sort of data. Yeah. Do you agree with what you said?
This is a very interesting question, and as Mike and Jerry has said, I personally feel no, it's not possible to do the centralized one. It's too much complicated because the infrastructure is already deployed everywhere. You know how instruments are deployed, devices are deployed everywhere, data structures. So it's too big to change in a one go and bringing all things together. So I think it's very sensible approach to go with a federated one. What we need to going forward for a 5-year or 10-year plan from here is the new services which we are developing. Are they following the proper standards? So we have to come up with the data interoperability standards. The APIs are well defined. If I have to connect one system to another in the future, how your new service, whatever you're now developing, and eventually we will be moving from already existing services. When they will be upgraded to a new level, they should follow the new standards which we are developing right now. So one is the data interoperability, slightly easier to implement as compared to the device level interoperability, because there are hardware. If you look at the IoT ecosystem, how many medical machines we have in the hospitals. How I make one of the machine to interact with directly with the other one, which one is manufactured by Philips 20 years ago, one is given by GE in recent years. They are not going to interoperate together in a very, not in the near future. So that's where we have to think carefully how we need an intermediate level of entity where these two machines sense their data and best bridge it together to communicate with each other.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. I mean, Isabel, you work in this space, in this bit of data. Do you see interoperability, I mean, kind of setting the standard and something potential for long term, kind of having really effective system that we can work with?
Yeah, I mean, selfishly, from the data science AI point of view, you want the data, and you want to be able to make sure that when you bring together, say, the data from different hospitals, for example, that when the column says something, it means exactly the same thing across different across the different extracts you get. I'm not sure that's the case now. So obviously, anything that would come along to impose an infrastructure where when you get in, when you say use this particular format, then you can be reliably assured that every column matches and means the same. That would be ideal. And that doesn't require a centralized system as such. It requires a mapping exercise or a standard, which is a different level of involvement, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's a discussion I've had with my students in the data science class. I mean, in the digital governance class, we talked about a lot about in terms of how do we standardize, right? I mean, in terms of ethics, governance, and policy issues around data. I mean, I think we'll come back to that. I'm coming to Lucy and Camille. This one is, I want you to look at it from the patient perspective. But what do you think would be the best, I mean, can I use the word best? The possible way, right, of really addressing this, what I call technology. We have a lot of technology that we're using now, right? What do you think would be the best possible approach or the potential possible approach we could take from the patient perspective? Let me start with Lucy.
So first of all, I agree with the things that have been said already. I think one system is just unrealistic. It's been tried, huge amounts of money were thrown about at it, huge amounts of time were wasted, nothing came of it. I also think maybe from a competition point of view, it's not the best thing to be aiming for. It ties everybody into one system, and I don't think that's necessarily a great idea. I do agree with there should be standards around interoperability so that we know when systems are being developed that they're going to be able to talk to the other systems that are used within the same sphere. I think from a patient perspective, this element that we're talking about maybe isn't so big on their mind. Often we're talking about things where they wouldn't be directly interacting with it or kind of inputting any data. It's a kind of much maybe bigger concern for clinicians and the people kind of working with those systems in the background. I do think from a patient perspective, patients are keen to have access to their information. So it needs to have a forward-facing version that is simple and easy to use and not complicated. There are also a lot of issues around that in terms of, do we want all information to be visible to patients? I know this is something that is a concern at the moment in mental health services, where certain information that may currently be on people's record may actually cause their mental health to deteriorate if that was kind of given to them and made visible to them. And in the world of mental health, it is fairly standard to specify which pieces of information will be shared with the patient and which pieces of information it wouldn't actually be helpful to share with the patient because it would actually be detrimental to their mental health. So I think there's a lot of issues around that, what gets shared and what doesn't, and how is it shared, how is it accessed. I think we can't forget that at the moment we're in a society where some people are very digitally enabled and very digitally knowledgeable, and some people are not. They either don't have the skills and knowledge, or they don't have the tools to do that. So yeah, just making sure there's a quality in that as well.
Interesting what you mentioned. I mean, in one of our the participants here group here, they were talking about the fact that we should be thinking about increasing patient access to their own personal data. Let's say, for example, if I did blood tests, right, I should be able to get access to that data. I own it, and I have the right to pass it on to whoever I want to. Is this something that you think it's possible, or?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that's happening at the moment. I had a blood test fairly recently. I got the results through a notification on my NHS app. I could go in there and look at them. So I know that is something that is happening. I do know at the moment there are issues with that around I have to have a separate login for that system. It's a slightly different system to another version of the NHS app that I have. Different areas using different ones. So again, I think there's that issue of interoperability. Why can I not do it through my normal NHS app rather than having to log into something else? I think it was called My Patient Choice or something, the one that my area was using. So definitely, but I do think that there might be certain pieces of information that you would want to think carefully as a clinician about. Is it helpful to share this directly with the patient? Or actually, is this something where you need to come in and have a face-to-face discussion about it? And does the system allow you those choices when you're putting the information in, to actually make those decisions and kind of tweak it? So like you can choose, this bit of information gets directly shared, this bit of information, actually it would not be helpful to share that directly with the patient without being able to have a conversation about it. So actually I want to book an appointment with that person and discuss it before they get sight of that in the app or whatever they're using to access their information. And at the moment, systems, some of the systems tend to be a bit all or nothing. You can either see everything or you can't see anything at all. And being able to make those distinctions, I think, from both a patient and clinician point of view, are really valuable.
Very interesting. That again, I mean, it's about educating people, knowing the risk of the data, right, and how you can share and what kind of data you can access. I think this will be very good for the group that's working on that project. Camille, let me come back to you. You also work with high risk people, right? What do you think in terms of from the patient perspective about this digital technology?
What Lucy said also about sharing the data and not sharing, when we have access, like, and we were creating an app for assessment and therapy for young people, especially children and teenagers, is this concern that if they get all the data and they're underage, they might have, like, they might induce anxiety or misunderstanding on what is going on and what is the procedure. And that's what also Lucy said. We developed that after having those services online with the app, then there's a consultation directly with a specialist to be sure that, first of all, they get a support and they know what were the results and what the data that was collected resulted in what service and what diagnosis, and also to be sure that everyone lives with the same impression and there's some situation that is supported by everyone, and everyone gets the same type of feedback and the same value of the app, because not everyone gets the same understanding from getting an app, because not everyone is at the same level of understanding technology and interacting with that and understanding the data and medical lingo, for example.
Yeah, I mean, thanks so much. I think that's really great. Before, I mean, I'm going to apologize. So we're going to go a little bit over time. Right, and because I really want to dig a little bit deep into some of these discussions so that our participants can also benefit from the discussion. So probably next 10 minutes, then I'll open for question and answer. I think I'm going to again back to Manik. We've talked a lot about interoperability. Right, I just want to ask this question: what do we think is the challenge of us doing that?
Of interoperability, did you say?
Yeah, interoperability
Okay.
in terms of how the different system or data science sort of intersect.
Honestly, I think you know, when I spoke about building the data infrastructure, I really think that platform design is not the way to go. And when I say that, what I mean is we need an ecosystem of infrastructure. So at the NNUH, we have AWS, we have Azure, we have GCP. Each of the AI projects that we're implementing have passed the IG clearance for unique identifiers to the patients through to the supplier's cloud, and the answer comes back and is interoperable back into the existing systems that we have, and it will be for the hospital-wide EPR. The problem is that it's always investment, right? You need money to do integration, and I think that it's a really interesting question that we're talking about. You know, results going back to a patient. I accept mental health is a particularly unique case in that example, but it often occurred to me that if you were down the high street and you paid for a pathology test, you'd expect it back on digital format, emailed to you, maybe through an app delivered to you. And question must be asked, why can't we achieve that in the NHS? And I think that the answer to that is multiple, and partially Lucy partially answered it by this is what's happening in different systems, but the investment cases for those technologies to get off the ground in different regions varies. So and other, you know, systems have different priorities where they have to funnel the funding. So technically, it's not that difficult to do, right? I mean, in other industries, they've done it, and the banking industry as well. They came up with a common data model for interoperability standards to deliver, what was it, the launch of change your bank account within 24 hours, if everyone recalls that. Can't remember how long ago it was. But, you know, that was facilitated by the Open Data Institute to get the banks together in the same room. And the difference is that they have money, right, to fund that technology spur to get the answer off the ground. And in the NHS, we just don't have that. In the health service, we don't have the same deep pockets to be able to invest in that level of interoperability.
According to you, Kunal, you also work with technology integration. I mean, what's your take on this?
So I totally agree with Mike. We have looked into the banking sector. They were able to often come up with these open APIs. You know, you can easily integrate with any of the systems. Yeah. It requires a huge amount of IT, software engineers work, and all this kind of infrastructure. It depends on how much money NHS has. But one of the points I would like to say is that, which Lucy has pointed out, is do we would like to make a system which we just not interoperable, but how we integrate human in the loop, because the NHS has the doctors, clinicians, and all those. They have expertise which, no matter how good AI is, but that human touch in that whole sector, they will not able to introduce. Whereas in a banking sector, it's a more of economical. You can go ahead and do the whole all that automation stuff. But whereas in NHS, when it comes to the people, where we are dealing with the vulnerable people, like you know, the society, we cannot automate everything using AI or machine learning or just the system. We have to have the system which has the human in the loop. So how we build that system, and that's a challenging, and it's a very, I think it's we have to think every time we build a system, how we make it to show that factor is captured correctly.
I mean, interesting how you brought in the kind of the more social dimension into the idea of interoperability. How do we integrate, which we see also emphasized Right, I'm going to go to you, Isabel. You work in the data space, and you also did a bit of work which has to do with social data. Right, what's your take on that in terms of this integration? Is it about technology integration, or is it about integrating people?
Yeah, I think it's more. I mean, the perspective is about integrating, but also thinking about what are the end user needs.
Yeah.
So integrating for the sake of integrating, when there's a limited resources and budget, perhaps it's not the right way to go. But very much thinking about what it is that what do patients want to see, what do clinicians want to see, and work backwards from there. There's also a dimension of accessibility in terms of some patients do not want to be moved completely digitally. How does that affect things? What is plan B? When we looked at, this was research to do in the context of the NHS Pass, was that there are segments of the population that just don't have that level of, oh, I'll just flip my app open and I will check my, if my blood test results have arrived, right? Or to go online to book an appointment with the GP, that's just not there. And so I think in all of this, there's that angle to consider as well.
I mean, that's quite interesting. Again, we're talking about this standardization. So as part of it, we also have to think from the patient perspective, not just the technology perspective. I'm going to go with Jerry. I think you've talked a lot about this, that we don't just look at technology, but we have to look at it from a wider perspective. What's your take on this?
So I think there's some really knotty problems here. We are at a point where, for me, I think there's a culture shift going on. The patients, particularly the younger patients, are not the same as my generation, my parents' generation. Doctor knows best, technology knows best, I will trust the establishment. That is not where we are now. My adult children's view on the world is it's my data, I have a right to see it.
Yeah.
So there is a different shift going on. And I think that has quite big impacts for us. It means we must focus on making sure what we do is explainable. So if we're going to make the data available to the patients, and we are, because we ain't going to have any choice, we've got to build the knowledge, the resources, such that those patients can understand what's being presented to them. We've got to present it in a meaningful way to them. But let's be clear, we don't have a choice of not presenting that data. That is going to happen. That's the way the world is moving. But we've got to think how we present that. Same with technology. The days of sitting there and saying, well, I'm not going to write a lay summary of this because it's just too difficult to understand. Okay, I have the pleasure of reviewing a lot of grant applications for UKRI. I sit on a lot of grant panels. That is dying, that's going. You've got to be able to think, even if you think the technology, the research you're doing is really, really complex, you've got to think about how you explain it to a decently educated layperson outside of your area. So again, as we look through today, so we've got to think of that. So we've got to think about that communications at patient data level, at technology level, but also around, we just talked about interoperability and sharing data at that level as well. Where we get that wrong at a system level, care.data, GPDPR fiasco a couple of years ago, it's catastrophic to research. It is catastrophic to moving forward the digitization. But there was also, we've just touched on this one of those who are not ready to move to a digital world. Okay, that's true, but we've got to see what we do to move them forward, because ultimately, if they do not move, their experience of the healthcare system will be degraded compared with those who are fully digital. That is going to happen. It is possibly even starting to happen now. So we need to think about what it is we to support that, possibly aging, possibly from certain socioeconomic groups, particularly possibly from certain ethnic groups. What do we do? What do we need to do to support that group? Because we can't hold back the move to digitization because there is a group who can't follow along. So we've got to think about how we move them with us.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I'm going to open the floor now for questions. You have 5-10 minutes. If you have any questions that you want to ask the panelists, it's great. I mean, you can also do it online.
I can ask a question.
Yeah.
So we're talking about making data visible to patients. And I think Jerry's has made a point about making sure that it provides value to patients, which I think is a very valid point, especially when I think Lucy was talking about her blood tests just a moment ago. Like, as a patient, you don't necessarily know what the markers actually represent, or whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or whether, you know, you're dying in a week, like, for example. And my question would be, how do you stop distrust of information being represented to the patients? So, for example, I did have an example, it's just gone off my brain. Hang on. Right, yeah. So, for example, me as a patient, I receive my blood tests and they say, oh, you've got an increased iron level, for example, which would typically indicate you've got a problem with your liver. I'm not a doctor, so don't trust me there. But I would do my own research and suddenly I found out that I might have cancer, right? As everything that you research tends to say you've got cancer, which unfortunately is the case with the increased accessibility of information. So when you've got that sort of happening at the moment, where people have a limited accessibility to their data, but they're still coming up to their own conclusions, how do you ensure that people who are going to suddenly have AI implemented within the healthcare are going to be able to trust that the AI is coming to the correct conclusion? Sorry, I feel like I kind of beat it around the bush quite a lot, but I hope.
Yeah, but that's interesting. The question about trust. So who wants to go for that?
So this is why it's important to have explainable AI if you're going to have AI, but also the idea of presenting not just information, but giving context. You know, you could, if you display this particular high iron level, then maybe then offering a link to an idea of this could be related to, and have an idea of the risks. So either by personogram or some really intuitive way of saying, in the general population, you know, there's many explanations, this could be it. So just to give a little bit more background, this would also involve people being open and willing to absorb that information, which is another open question as to whether they would.
Yeah, Lucy, you want to take on that? I mean, in terms of how do patients trust right, the information that we get if we are to share the data, maybe through digital device?
So I think there's two things, Vanessa. There's the trust and there's the understanding. So I think, you know, if I was puzzled by my blood test results, I was like, no, I don't know what these mean. So we have to make sure that information comes along that explains things in a way that would be understandable to the vast majority of the population, and think about how we incorporate that. So there was something when my blood test came back that I could click on that gave me some information. I still didn't really understand it. So I did start Googling. I'm like, what is this? So that's what people are going to do if the information that's presented them doesn't give them a clear enough picture or a full enough picture of what that means. And I think it comes back to what I said as well about, as a clinician, being able to choose, is this something that goes direct to the patient without me contacting them and having a consultation with them about it in order to fully explain what it means and answer any of their questions? Or is it something that actually it's perfectly fine to go direct to the patient? We've got a clear way of explaining it in that communication with them through the app, and making those judgment calls. Because I think for most people, if you get a blood test back and it tells you, it seems to indicate to you something's too high, something's too low, you're going to have questions about that. What does that mean? So yeah, I think that's that point, and hopefully people do have trust in their doctors, their medical professionals, their clinicians, so that when they have those conversations and the chance to ask questions about it, they can get fuller information. But I think it does come back to that, like, what information is appropriate to just share directly in that way with nothing around it, and what information needs a phone call from your GP, a consultation with your clinician that gives you the opportunity to ask your questions and fully understand what that means.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So I can a little bit elaborate on this one a little bit further. So think about the data which you just got from one, that's just one set of the data. It's not all about your whole historical data. And that's why we are going towards that system where we have a full picture of a patient, what they are eating in last 1 year, what they're buying, what other things they are doing. And then that collective data, maybe we will have a similar kind of a chat GPT, chat doctor kind of a services, which combines together all your data. We have already learned from other patients' data, or machine learning models could more precisely go to tell, based on your data, it looks like you have those 4 or 5 problems might be possibility of that closing. So for the time being, we are not yet there because we don't have that full picture of all the medical data is not there. Our AI in medical sector is not that advanced, even though it is advancing slowly. But that's why we need this whole data to be collected. We need it to run those machine learning models more precisely. And maybe it's not, I don't see it's too far in next 5 years or so. Maybe we will be there. We will have much better models are out there which we can use. So I guess I answered your question. At this point of time, yes, we don't trust the technology because we, as a AI or machine learning model specialist but I don't trust my model itself because I don't have the data or at this point. But in a 5-year times, when we tried those models and we know what is the accuracy of our models are right now in predicting what is the symptoms of this patient based on these factors, might be we could. It will bring into some level of trust. It's the same question. If you ask a question to now ChatGPT, tell me about this, that give you answer. How much trust do you have on that answer? You could say, okay, it looks like 90% is correct. 10% you are still not trusting that one. Same thing happened a few years ago when we were asking Google a question. Oh, Google, tell me what is the nearest hospital to my house. Google tell you something, how you trust that result or correct result. We were not trusting. Eventually, the system got better and better with more user feedback to the system. So even the same thing, right now we are not trusting completely. We have some trust on those results which we get out of that. But as we system mode progress, system learn from the user feedback as well. We will be going there. But as I'm still strong believer, we cannot take out the doctors out of the loop here. We still have 90-80% of the correction. If we can achieve 80% of accuracy on those models, that's a very good achievement. Still, we need a 20% of the doctors and expertise to feed into that. That's exactly is happening.
Yep.
I just wanted to complement and extend the question. We talked about data sharing across different parts of the healthcare infrastructure, as well as data being available to the patient. But we also mentioned people who are actually holding data about themselves through wearables or mobile apps, women tracking their periods, to how these devices tracking our heart rates and etc. We might have a wealth of information as a patient in addition to the health data that we receive, and we might be at a better place for a diagnosis because we are holding a lot more data ourselves. So where is the appetite or the support infrastructure for bring your own data or bring your own device to complement the diagnosis that the doctors will eventually make? Is there any appetite, or is there any work towards it, and what are the challenges there, of course?
Can I take that one? Because there's some good things and there's some real challenges in bring your own data. So I sit on the scientific advisory board for the Alzheimer's Research UK Early Diagnosis of Neurodegenerative Diseases programme. And that has focused quite heavily over the last few years on data from personal devices. What that has shown up in a really interesting way is actually, it's still the case that a blood test is a much better. So biomarkers are proving much better than digital markers.
Yeah.
So we've got to think about the fact that, yes, we can bring that, we've got to bring that in. One of the other things to say is there's some really there's real problems with inequality from personal reported data. So Fitbit.
Yeah.
So Fitbits work really well if you are white. The darker your skin tone, the less effective, the less accurate Fitbits are. And therefore, if we're going to go down that route, we've actually got some fundamental work to do as technologists around making sure we actually have personal devices that work for the whole of our populations, because otherwise we're in danger of actually increasing inequality rather than improving the data. So I do think we need a structure, but we've also got to go in with in some areas, digital markers are not actually the right answer. Some of them straight traditional blood test biomarkers work better, and we've got to make sure it works for the whole community, and it's sustainable, because those personal devices change quite rapidly. So
Yes.
we've got to make sure that we're looking at things that, if we're building 10-year longitudinal work, actually we're going to have data that spans that period.
So I can add on this one to second question is, thank you, Gary, for explaining that very well. But overall, I think this is a good model to having a centralized data, models which NHS holds for you. And if you have your own data, you can refine that results based on your, because that's data, only you holds the data, not anybody else holds that data for you. The challenges are still the same, basically, that how much you trust your data. Your devices are, how much I trust my data, that's again to come to the trusting. How many times I'm using it correctly, how correctly it's supposed to do, or how, the device itself, there are so many variety of data. If I'm wearing a one manufacturer stuff and the other manufacturer, they may have a little bit discrepancies in the result itself. So I think as long as we start trusting the wearable ecosystem is very well defined and trusted system there, then yes, why not? It would be a very good model to going forward to define that.
I just want to, for logistics sake, we are running quite a bit over. If any of our online guests are not able to stay, we've already run over a little bit. Please, we're happy to set, we just want to give you the opportunity to be able to say goodbye, and we don't want to take any more of your time. If you're able to stay, we'll continue the discussions, maybe 5 more minutes more, and then wrap up. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Just wanted to give that opportunity because we have run quite a bit over. I don't want to make, you might have other things to do, and I don't want to hold you here hostage.
I need to leave at 11, but I'm okay till then.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, the discussion about health will always take, a lot of time to do, right? So probably I'd say what we do,
Can I add a bit in terms of, let's say, the appetite for wearable devices? I think UK Biobank, when they are recording their participants, they have wearable sensors sent to some of the participants, about 100,000, where they collected their daily life activities and so on. I have been part of a project in the University of Manchester, which was called Wearable Clinic, where the goal of the project was to see whether a 24/7 supplementary data could enhance the decision-making process from, let's say, you see your GP maybe once, let's say, every 3 months or so on. So there are a lot more data that you can have from your devices, to be honest. But with aging population and digital literacy, or the appetite to technology is not equal across various age groups, we saw that, let's say, the person forgot to get their wearable, but whatever was sent to them as a process of monitoring or capturing what they are doing every day and so on, they were missing data in various cases. The person completely forgot to put on their wearable. It was not charged for a specific period of time. So this is again about increasing the digital inequality. So it could be that you are capturing data from a specific group more. Some people are still missing from the landscape of the capturing process. And yeah. Like there are data sets nowadays available to look into daily life activities, but a lot of missing data is coming from a specific group, which is not yet, let's say, competent in terms of how to make that data available from their end to a supplementary system.
That's good.
Can I come in on this question from a mental health perspective? Because in mental health, what we're often dealing with is people's self-reported symptoms. We can't do a blood test to check something if you're talking about anxiety and depression. We're very much relying on people's self-reported. What was your mood like on that day? What did you do during the day? Did you go out and see people, or were you sitting at home on your own? Those kinds of things. So I actually think in the world that I operate in, not necessarily wearables, because that's not capturing that kind of information, but if people are using apps where they're kind of like tracking their mood through the day, or tracking their anxiety levels, or recording what they're doing, and that information can flow through, that's actually likely to give the clinician a much more realistic picture of what that patient's doing, rather than them sitting in an appointment remembering what they felt like last week. So I think that is it would be really helpful if there was that level of interoperability of some of the apps, because as clinicians, what we do is we will ask people to record things, but we don't have anything that integrates with our system that can pull that information through. They have to send us a Word document that they've completed, or bring back the piece of paper where they've been writing it down all week if they've remembered to do it. So having that in an app that maybe like gives people a reminder, like it pops up with a little message, what's your mood like at the moment, so that they can track it, and that actually links back to the clinician, is something that is potentially really helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucy. I think shouldn't say we're trying to draw this close so that people can go about their normal business. So let's, so let's wrap up with just 1 minute each. Just your final word that you want to give to the participants. Yeah, let me start with Camille. Just 1 minute, your final word.
Yes, my final word is that, of course, thank you for inviting me, and that what has been said many times today is that we have to take into account the patients, how they interact with the technology, and how they are aware of the technology and how it works, both of using the technology and understanding the data, and also making sure that the quality of the product we're offering is better, or at least at the same level of interaction at the office, like traditional healthcare system.
Thank you so much. Mike? Yes. Thank you. And likewise, thank you very much for inviting me. I think what I would say is that we're at the beginning stages. You know, these waves of investment that we are seeing in the NHS now and health service in the UK are the beginning stages. So you know, to address the deluge of patient-derived data in the future, I think that will progress towards a cloud infrastructure which will allow us to capture it, but it's not possible now. And I think that any healthcare system is really tied to the culture in the country. So we've got to take step-by-step interactions with the patient groups. It's already been mentioned, you know, we've got this divergence of different groups of patients. I think technologies such as the virtual ward are roads into that sort of area where we're proving out cases where people can use it. Frailty, for example, and an elderly is possible with wearable virtual ward technology, but with the right infrastructure in place behind it. So I think we are where we are, and we will just continue to progress down that road. AI will be able to give some, in context and with large language models, more better interaction with it, but we can't speed this process, and we need to bolster the investment case, which will take time.
Lucy, just one.
Yeah, what do you want to add? So yeah, this is definitely a long-term project. So hopefully there are people in this room that have an interest in this that are going to stick through this long term, because the development of these types of systems is not something that happens quickly. They need to go through lots of iterations. But if people stick with it, hopefully we get to something really good in the end. It needs to be something that people want to use. So really think about usability, both for clinicians and for patients. I think unfortunately often we're using systems that are actually really difficult and to use, and just make you feel stressed because they're not intuitive and they don't look nice and they're not easy to use. So that element of it, I think, is really important if you're going to get people on board with using things.
Thank you so much. Lucy, Jared?
So I think a couple of things. One, as we look at the ideas and the proposals today, as we work through those, look at technologies and assist. I think I mentioned this earlier. Don't look at it as necessarily a replacement, but look at it as an assistant to the clinicians, to the patients, to the data scientists working on it. So think of those ideas. Second, don't necessarily try and solve the biggest problem out there. That may be beyond the scope of what we can do today. Look at problems that need to be solved. They might be problems around assisting with diagnosis, but they might also be around system efficiency. What can you do to improve, I mentioned on the earlier one, improve the rate of shows for outpatient appointments? It might, so think of system efficiencies as well as clinical support. And as I think probably lots of people mentioned, it's data about people, it's data about patients. So our patients need to be front and center of what we do. We need their confidence, but we need their involvement in what we do as technologists. So we've got to have that thought in mind all the way through.
Thank you so much. Isabel?
So not much else to add on these points here about thinking about who's going to use the technology and how it's going to make their life easier. So there's a lot of sophisticated AI out there, but it's about making sure that what is delivered is trusted, transparent enough, explainable enough, monitored enough. So it's going to be used, and thinking about how and when it will be used, so that what you share about your, I guess, models is actionable, usable, and doesn't add any time to what is already a busy system.
Thank you so much.
My one takeaway from the workshop is that when you're designing your system, work with interdisciplinary team. Find out someone else who understands. So for me, if I'm a technologist, I'm building these communication protocols or things, but I need to have some sociologist in the group who can understand the ethnography. I need a UI person who can understand how the users are going to interact with the technology. So just look outside the box that, I'm building this product, how that is going to be used by the people. And whatever, whether you're building a services, whether you're building a wearable device, or whether you're building any platform for a data aggregation or privacy. So think that product as a holistic view from a different angles, and that's where the different people bring different expertise and skills together.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to thank our panelists for really allocating your time to this event. I think we've learned a lot today. So we appreciate you being in this panel. We look forward to working with you in the near future. Our research group is Computer Science for Social Good. We did a lot of heads research, both in the UK as well as in abroad. So we look forward to partnering with each and every member of you here to work on really projects that will transform the healthcare sector. Thank you so much.